What we think we know, we've actually borrowed from somebody else. The subconscious mind begins to record all of the sensations and inputs that you are given. It records feelings, emotion, and language. But more importantly, it records also all the subliminal information that is a part of your childhood. So bit by bit, you suck up like a sponge the tribal belief pattern that is offered. Those tribal belief patterns aren't going to contradict the ego because the central point of the tribe's identity is its ego self. What is a tribe if it isn't a collection of personalities that come together and belong to one genetic group or one social group? So the tribal mind is laced with a lot of negativity and fear and dysfunction. It's also laced with the agenda that the collective ego of the tribe would have you accept. If you're not very evolved, the tribal mind is a good place to be because it offers you the familiarity and safety of a collective consciousness, a collective strength. But once you start to reach for your individuality and your infinite self, the tribal mind will bug you. It's too restrictive and controlling to hold you. On the journey from ego to spirit, you're going to have to review and possibly ditch many of those old beliefs. Tribal beliefs teach restriction and fear. Don't do this, you'll fail. Don't do that, people won't like it. But mostly what the tribe wants you to do is to sustain its status quo. The programming that our children receive is a programming that says, put yourself to one side, sacrifice yourself, support the tribal good. And the wage earners, of course, are forced to pay for the tribal good, the common good. The tribe needs your money to sustain its power base. When you incarnated into this earth plane, with all its structures, institutions, all the regulations, the whole modus operandi, government, taxes, the educational institutions, and so forth, all of these things were already in place. So your infinite self had a vision of this and accepted it. However, once you've sucked up all that information and you've trained to be a good little drone and you've followed the rules, you can eventually understand them for what they are. In our society, we tend to think that the rules are cast in stone. This is the way it was always done. This is what everybody says. This is how to dress. This is how to behave. This is hip. Everything else isn't hip. The personality needs to elevate itself above others, and the tribe attempts to elevate itself above the other tribes. But it wants individuals to conform. It doesn't want you being different. Conformity is boring because it creates a society of people that are grouped together in a glob-like evolution. Understand it like this. If you're thinking what everybody else is thinking, if you do what they do, if you use their language, dress the same way, believe the same things, and tick along, you don't really have an individual spiritual reality. You have a collective reality. I don't believe we get into an individual spiritual reality until we break away from the tribal mind and the tribal emotion. Yes, you're an individual, in that you're an individual within the tribal mind, but you're not a true spiritual individual. Part of the sacred path is to become an individual, to stand on your own, to have your own individual identity, beliefs, and methodology. However, the tribe doesn't like you doing that. Our systems are based on control. The whole idea of Congress, government, taxation, the police state, and the local controls are all designed to milk the taxpayer and impose control. It's illegal to disagree, and we're programmed to feel embarrassed or guilty if we push against the status quo. The status quo is not a particularly benevolent institution. It's a self-perpetuating institution, writing rules to sustain itself. Conformity is also a part of the desire of a nation or a tribe or an organization to sustain its psychic integrity. Imagine a couple of thousand years ago when there wasn't much medical knowledge, no real understanding. You could comprehend how the tribes were riddled with fear. When a person dropped dead, they couldn't do an autopsy and say, yeah, well, he ate a bunch of crud and died. They tended to think that misfortune, contradiction of the ego, famine, disease, death, and so on were manifestations of the wrath of God. That God was pissed off with the tribe and therefore sent mayhem down upon them. So when the goat died, it was considered a real bad thing, because obviously people needed the food and they were up for using the goat. Their ignorance put them into a very emotional relationship with their fate and with the God force. So, if the crops were good, God was pleased. A bad crop, pestilence, disease, another tribe coming down from the hills and kicking them stupid, they were all manifestations of the wrath of God. They didn't understand it. They didn't understand microbes, bacteria. They didn't have antibiotics. They didn't understand how the blood pumped round the body. They had no knowledge, none. Period, full stop. So you can understand how What they really needed was to feel safe within their community. They needed the people around them to support them, to defend them, to care for the crops, to tend to the animals, to raise the kids. So anyone threatening that psychic collectivism was naturally considered an evil force that had to be banished or destroyed. So the idea came up that if you didn't believe what the tribe believed, then somehow you would lower the tribe's energy and God would be displeased because of your lack of faith or action. Maybe you didn't follow through on the Great Hippopotamus Ceremony, or every year in June when they threw 2 virgins off the cliff, you'd disagree and say, no, I don't fancy chucking virgins off the cliff this year. If you disagreed, it broke down the integrity of the tribe and generated fear. Even in our society today, where we do have the knowledge and we understand the physical existence, we still have this sense of having to conform. Especially if you want to rise up in society within the institutions or the status quo. It requires you to slot in and follow the system. There's very little opportunity for rocking the boat, and there's very little opportunity within the institutions and the old-style corporations for real creativity. One of the things that makes me laugh is watching men go to work for the institutions. They're all wearing this funny little coloured piece of cloth around their necks. Take a look at this funny piece of cloth, because nobody knows what it's for. It serves no purpose. The funny little piece of cloth, often made of silk or coloured cotton, is tied around their necks. The neck is where the air goes through into the body. You'd think that tying something around your air passage wouldn't be conducive to well-being or comfort. Yet millions of men go through this ludicrous symbolic act of strangling themselves every morning, tying a coloured cloth around their windpipe. It's really weird, man. I suppose originally it was some kind of napkin or serviette that was supposed to stop food falling down your shirt. But the original meaning has been lost. Now it serves as respectability and reliability. The theory is that crooks and incompetents don't wear ties. Yet nobody in the mainstream has ever put up their hand and said, "Excuse me, what's this thing for?" Yet if you work in a corporation, if you work in an institution, you are required to strangle yourself with a piece of cloth. It's a way of joining. If you suddenly decided to hang it out your pocket instead of around your neck, or you decided not to wear it at all, you'd be considered some kind of weirdo. The whole point of the collectivism of the tribal mind is control. And one of the things they had to control, in the olden days especially, was the women. Not just because of psychic integrity, but the future of the tribe relied on the women. The women had to crank out chubbies for the tribe and give birth to warriors that would defend the place later on. So the control of women was enormous. It's only recently that women have begun to win equality. Forgive me, ladies, if this sounds offensive, but in the olden days, women were considered the same as cattle. In other words, the more women the tribe had, the more babies they could have. So the more warriors, or more females, to generate more babies. So women were a commodity, and they were thought of as part of the wealth of the tribe. So the system needed to rigidly control the sexuality of women. It was only when the pill came along, and all of that broke down, that women could do whatever they wanted. They could raise kids on their own and have sex without worrying about it. They didn't belong to men anymore. You can see how a lot of the remnants of the medieval tribal idea of femininity are still a part of our society. There's still that underlying feeling or idea that a woman ought to shut up and go have babies, and she's not supposed to be commercially successful, become a millionairess, or have any alternative ideas. The tribe's controlled through fear, regulation, and punishment, and none of that's really changed today. From protecting the psychic integrity came religious intolerance and control. The tribes weren't keen on anyone forming their own religion. Everyone had to support the psychic integrity of the communication that the tribe had with God. If you internalize God, then you'll understand that you don't really need a third party outside of you to intercede between you and God. If you want to talk to God, all you have to do is quieten the mind through meditation or prayer and feel it out. In the olden days, the idea was that you were too weak or too hopeless, too statusless to have a dialogue with God. So systems were developed whereby you used a third party to get in touch with the Great One. Once you had third parties interceding, then all the rules, guilt, and obligations came into play. So nowadays we have a system where millions of people on the earth plane believe that the God force is with them, and they're basically spiritually free. While others who still don't believe the God force is within them feel that they need someone to intercede on their behalf. Control nowadays is an old-fashioned idea. It doesn't mean that you can't be a part of a church if you want to be. Some people enjoy the camaraderie, the friendships, the music, being taught by a knowledgeable holy man or woman. So fair go, if that's what you're into. But remember, this thing isn't designed to set you free. None of the tribal belief patterns will ever set you free. That's why I was so attracted to Taoism. Because it's not a church, it's a philosophy. It's just an idea to liberate you. In Taoism, nobody's going to come along and impose any guilt trips on you or make you pay 10% of your money or load you up with a lot of do's and don'ts. It's not to say that all tribal ideas are silly. Some of them make sense. There were ideas about health and hygiene, how to grow food, how to interrelate peacefully with other members of the tribe. But a lot of it was to do with conforming, control, and making sure you didn't rise above the pack or, woe betide, leave the tribe. So, we come into the earth plane, we accept the tribal belief patterns as being the way they are, and they will gradually change over the next few hundred years, of course. Then we have to release most of them. You have to go beyond the discomfort of becoming an individual, doing something that's different. One of the exercises I gave some people in one of my seminars once was to put on a chicken outfit and go to work. Throw away the little piece of cloth, I said, and put on a chicken outfit instead. Don't explain to anybody at the office why you're wearing a chicken outfit. Let's say you work in a bank. Just walk in, sit down, and start cashing people's checks. When people ask why you're wearing a chicken outfit, say, "What chicken outfit?" The point of this exercise is to get you into believing in yourself. You aren't your clothes, you aren't your image, you're a divine energy inside a body. I am what I am. I'm a divine spark inside a body that happens to be wearing a chicken outfit. I even had 3 guys from an Australian commando unit in my course. They went to their military barracks dressed in ballerina outfits. They walked past the guard at the barracks and he saluted them. You've got to give those lads a bit of credit for really believing in themselves, for saying, I am what I am, and I don't have to conform to keep you happy. A lot of the issue about conformity is the ego seeking approval. We conform to win approval. If I do this, will you love me? If I have sex with you whenever you want me to, will you love me? If I say these nice things, will you consider me holy or spiritual? The fact is, most of it is partly imposed from above as a controlling influence and partly imposed by you through fear of breaking out of the status quo and through fear of being judged by people. If you've never broken out of the status quo, then tomorrow do something crazy. Go to work in your swimming trunks or do something odd or different. Don't put your tie on. Spend all day walking backwards. When people say, why are you walking backwards? Say, I like to see where I've been. Just start to do things that break up the rigid conformity that the mind has and the fear that it has of breaking away from the mold. Remember, if you can't break away, you're stuck forever and ever. Amen. You're bound to trot along in the destiny of the people. You cannot create an alternative reality and a true spiritual evolution for yourself until you agree to break away. Over the next 2 weeks, invent 6 ways that you will use to break up your normal rhythm of life. For example, go to a restaurant and order your dinner backwards. Start with a coffee, go to the ice cream and the main dish and finish up with a starter. Pick types of food you never eat. If you hate jazz, go to a jazz club. If you hate broccoli, order bunches of it every time you sit down for a meal. Remember this. The routine that you are familiar with day to day is a part of your ego's authority over you. By doing things differently, you begin to challenge its authority. All human knowledge is affected by human weakness. Weakness is endemic to our human situation. The ego is dominated by the idea of death. I'm going to talk about death later on. But the idea of sustaining, saving, holding on, restricting, being careful, not taking risks, and the ego's sense that it doesn't know what's going on makes us weak. We all have that weakness inside of us, not just the fear that the ego experiences, but the self-indulgence. One of the things that will bug you enormously as you trot along this spiritual path is the copious amounts of self-indulgence that we all labor under. The ego is grim when it comes to its self-indulgent attitude. It constantly wants to make itself important. It constantly wants things for nothing. It constantly wants reassurance. It needs attention. It's always seeking to gratify itself. It's not surprising that we soon become victims of the ego. The ego feels insecure, so it nails a list of demands to your forehead. You wake up in the morning exhausted, having gone out the day before and done all this stuff to keep the ego happy, and it still isn't happy. It says, here, sucker, here's another list of stuff I want you to go get. You know, get me this, get me that. So the weakness inside the mind is something that we have to work to go beyond. And of course, a lot of that weakness comes from the ego's fear and its sense of not knowing, which causes a terrible disquiet. However, as you embrace the spiritual path, you understand that you're in flow. You're only ever going to see a few yards in front of you. So one of the ideas that I want you to grab is that you can feel secure even when you don't know. It's only a bad habit that says you got to know. You don't. When you become spirit, you become more open. And then you can just accept things and flow. When people say to you, what do you know? You can say, nothing. Don't know, don't care. Then you go beyond the weakness of the ego, whereby it won't move until it knows. You're going to have to move not knowing, feeling your way along, asking yourself constantly, hey, how does this feel? Does it feel right? If it doesn't, make adjustments. So when you can come out of don't know, don't care, you're free. Instantly you go past one of the great human weaknesses, needing to know. If you're balanced today, you'll be more balanced tomorrow, because your energy's going up. If you're abundant today, you'll be more abundant tomorrow, because your energy's expanding. Simple. Once you realize the nature of the weakness of this existence, it becomes a huge triumph and a great thrill to go beyond that weakness. In the end, that's what this journey is all about. In my view, self-indulgence is one of the biggest blocks to spiritual development. It's arrogance. The idea that someone owes you a living, someone owes you importance, respect, someone owes you opportunities is silly. To become a spiritual being, you're going to have to be self-sufficient. So if you believe that someone out there is going to provide it all for you, you can't come to an understanding of this physical plane because you've got to dominate it to go beyond it. You've got to go through life to go past it, so to speak. So you have to generate enough energy to sustain yourself. If you can't earn loads of money right now, then begin by reducing your needs and increasing your energy, increasing your activity. Rather than saying, I've got to have this, I've got to have that, what you ought to say is, I've got less money, so I'm going to consume less. Maybe I'll live in a cheaper dwelling, get a cheaper car, eat less, spend less money on beer. You come to a place of balance inside whatever money you do have. On the spiritual path, nothing is guaranteed. The only guarantee is energy. If you have energy, that's your guarantee. If you haven't got energy, you'll become imbalanced. Things will start coming at you. It's simple, really. From self-indulgence comes self-importance. It's fine to feel confident, but don't drift into that nauseating self-importance that so many people suffer from. And don't get into status trips, where you are in the pecking order, who's up, who's down, who's hip, who isn't, who's spiritual, who isn't spiritual. All of that is just snobbery. When you look at our world, full of racial discrimination and snobbery and people posing, seeking attention, all that Hollywood stuff, it's grim, isn't it? It's really grim. It's a lot of weakness, seeking to be heard, seeking to promote itself, seeking to make themselves people, seeking to make themselves special. The Tao says, to be always talking is against nature. He who boasts of what he will do succeeds in nothing. That is why he that possesses the Tao does not linger. Clever stuff, that Tao. The initiate doesn't care to be special. He or she is happy to stand at the back, happy to be silent. He or she is happy to slip in and out unnoticed. You don't need all of that razzmatazz and glamour. All you need is contentment, creativity, love, comprehension, gratitude, and sacredness. Those are the real things in this lifetime. Everything else is just hype and BS, isn't it? When people yearn for things, it makes them weak. You know when you fall in love and you desire the other person, you yearn for them. The very fact that you're desperate for them often means you can't have them. Your stifling need makes that person uncomfortable and they back away. When you yearn for some particular goal in your life, in leaning towards it emotionally, in pushing for it, you affirm that you don't have it, actually driving the very thing you want away from yourself. So control that yearning and say, hey, I'd like to have a new car, but I can't afford it at this time. But I feel abundant. I feel the car as a part of my energy. I'll have it later, or maybe something even better. Then work in a concerted way towards the goal. In this case, getting the car. Don't yearn and don't moan. And take a moment every day before you go to sleep or before you rise in the morning to give thanks for what you do have. This is beautiful. These children are beautiful. This home, it ain't so great, but thank you. Thank you, Great Spirit, for providing a shelter. Thank you for these clothes, these friendships. Thank you for these economic opportunities. The other human weakness, which we ought to discuss, is guilt. Guilt was invented by the tribe as a form of control. If you didn't follow along, people would say you're a rotten person because you wouldn't trot according to the rules. The fact is, most of the things you might feel guilty about are just rules that other people invented. In the eternal Tao, there are no ups and downs. There is no good and evil. There is high energy that sets people free and expresses love. And there's low energy that restricts, controls, and manipulates people. But it's only energy. There are no absolutes, no definitions, no judgments. I don't believe metaphysically that there are any completely innocent victims. I believe that if you put out restriction, weakness, manipulation, and lack, you pull to you negative experiences. In the totality of things, the victim and the aggressor are one and the same energy. If you've done things wrong to somebody, yes, you could have chosen a more righteous way of acting, but on the other hand, you didn't. And they put out a negative energy and pulled you into their life, and you trotted across town at your expense to mess them about. So they ought to say, thank you, God, for sending me a teacher who's messed me about and infringed upon me. I've learned. Guilt is worthless. If you've messed up or failed in this lifetime, grant yourself absolution. Then draw a line in the sand and say, from now on, I'm going to act in a more honorable way. The important thing is that you somehow have to be able to close off that guilt and realize that there isn't any real sin. There's low-energy actions and feelings, and there are high-energy actions that love and liberate, inspire and release people. But that's all there is, and we come to experience both types of energy, both types of action in this lifetime. Naturally, as a spiritual person working on themselves, you're going to try to choose as many high-energy, liberating attitudes and actions as you can. But if sometimes you go the other way and fail, you haven't really failed. All you've done is gone up to the other end of the scale, so to speak. Understand that whatever you did in the past was a part of your learning. Bit by bit, you will strengthen, become more, and go beyond. Sometimes you may have to fall apart or do something that's really infringing or grim because that's what you needed at the time, and that's what you did, so you can absolve yourself and move on. The other weakness that affects people is poor self-image. A poor self-image usually comes from childhood. You can work on it by concentrating and loving yourself. If you would take quiet time and meditate, if you acknowledge yourself for the things you have achieved, if you have the will to improve yourself, to raise your energy, exercise, become more organized, then bit by bit the self-image starts to build. The whole point of this journey from ego to spirit is one of acceptance. If you aren't comfortable or you have a poor self-image, the first thing you need to do is to accept it. The second thing to do is gradually go past your shame, past your guilt, and work your way to where you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, this person's okay. You can reconcile what's gone before. This person is moving up. So understand these weaknesses are part of the programming and they're here to be transcended. To recapitulate, don't bitch about your weaknesses. Either work on them or ignore them. And concentrate upon your strengths instead. If you concentrate upon your strengths, usually your weaknesses will fall away and become less dominant in your life. There is an enormous power inside of you. It is an infinite power, with all the knowledge and wisdom of the God Force. Never forget that. It will take you from weakness to strength. The masters were supernatural because others weren't. Here we realize that the masters who walked this planet in ancient history were masters because the people who were around them at that time were metaphysically weak. So if you go back several thousand years knowing the tribes were ignorant and suddenly an immense energy pops up like Jesus or Buddha, an energy so far ahead of the common people, it's not surprising that they made these masters into gods. They had to be. They would naturally look up to anyone that had perception and understanding. If I could transfer you back to like 500 BC, you'd instantly become a god with the knowledge you have today, to those people anyway. The Christ consciousness, the Buddhahood, the flow of energy that these masters tapped into is available today. It isn't something that's disappeared. The energy is here. The extrasensory perception, the ancient wisdoms, miracles, it's all available now. Energy doesn't disappear, it just changes. In 500 BC, when Lao Tzu sat under his little tree and wrote the Tao Te Ching, he could have had electricity to light his paper. The electricity was there. All of the energies have been since the beginning of time. Okay, it took us 2,500 years to discover electricity and to harness it, but that energy, like the energy of the masters, is perpetual. If in your prayers and meditations you start to call upon that energy, call upon the name of your teacher, call upon your God, upon the God force within you, you can begin to tap into that power. Most people don't realize that. We haven't really begun to understand what a human can do. We're still a bit stuck in the old stuff. Most of our metaphysical, spiritual and religious beliefs have come from at least 2,000 years ago. Whereas we've moved tremendously in technology, science, medicine, chemistry, our metaphysical knowledge is still Neanderthal. You have the same amount of power that the masters had. You can sit in a meditation and vision the way that Jesus or Buddha would have visioned, the way that Lao Tzu or Muhammad would have tapped into that energy. You can feel beyond today's knowledge, to wisdom that is not normally available. You can touch into what the Theosophists called the Akashic Record, which is basically the collective unconsciousness wherein is stored all the knowledge we have ever had. You can align to that. If you're learning to play the guitar, listen to the best guitar player there's ever been and imagine yourself inside their consciousness. Put yourself into the mind of that guitar player and become him or her as you practice playing the guitar. If you want to be a great footballer, watch the reruns of the greatest footballers that there have ever been and enter into their energy. Put their boots on, so to speak. It's all there. The energy of Einstein, Beethoven, Mozart, Isaac Newton, Edison, Tesla. All of that knowledge and energy is still available. Rather than looking at the master's energy as something on a pedestal that you can never reach, what you need to do is internalize the energy, internalize the Christ consciousness, the Buddhahood, the light, and make yourself a part of it. Align to where there is brilliance. Align to the power and feel it inside of you. If Jesus could put his hands upon somebody and heal them, so can you. That is the exciting part of this spirituality within, is tapping into all of the inspiration, the wisdom, and the knowledge that has been forgotten. Then you can recreate it and offer it to other people.